Video number 9 then, we're going to look at some examples of extensive production systems and look a little bit about the history of extensive and intensive production. Well, with extensive animal production, you tend to use systems where animals are left more out in the fields and left to their own devices. So although it's much more difficult to do these things with, say, egg production or dairy production, you can do free-range chickens, but unfortunately they don't produce nearly enough to meet the demands of the consumers. With animals such as cattle and sheep, they're often left to roam in fields, maybe sometimes brought indoors as for part of the year, say in the winter, as a semi-intensive system. But in extensive systems, sheep are a classic example where they're left to roam on the mountains and just collected in at the end of the year. A lot less welfare issues, very few ecosystems problems with the ecosystem. The most being that, of course, the fields which the animals roam over, they will be cropped by the animals, so they won't go to their natural process of succession and produce in a complex ecosystem. With crop production, less intense systems can be used so to avoid using fertilizers and pesticides. Different systems can be used where we plant two different types of plants next to each other. We can use sheeting to cover weeds rather than using herbicides. Smaller fields where there are hedgerows to maintain biodiversity, but production will decrease a lot with things like that, because the plants in the hedgerows are going to compete with the crops for light. It's going to be very difficult to put down sheeting and more time consuming, and when you've got two crops growing against each other, you can't just put down a machine to pluck up the lot on a mass scale. They have to be individually picked. So extensive systems are going to have problems where there's probably going to be more weeds, more pests, and as a result, production will decrease. In aquaculture, extensive systems tend to be in larger pools which don't use more natural pools, so they might be in a lake, but in that lake they are in a captured a surrounded area, if you like, so they can't leave it, but they still are in their natural surroundings. But one of the problems that they have with that is that you can't control the environment. In an indoor tank, you can control the temperature, you can control the conditions within it to make sure that they produce the maximum amount. You can't do that in outdoor lakes and cages. So instead, you have to use things like nitrogen-based fertilizers to provide them with the nutrients, the fish with nutrients, because there's not going to be nearly enough nutrients in that lake to provide a larger scale, the large number of fish or what have you that you're trying to produce. And of course, adding nitrogen to water can then cause problems. It's a process called what we call algae bloom. Well, algae feeds off the nitrogen and builds up on the surface. That kills pond life underneath, because the pond plants need light for photosynthesis, and then when bacteria break them down, the bacteria flourish, use up oxygen and kill other organisms in the water. It's what we call eutrophication. So you always have to be careful when applying fertilizers near water. But unlike the intensive system, the waste doesn't have to be removed as much, because it'll probably be washed away in the natural water flow. With your deforestation, More extensive systems tend to use things like what we call rotation, where the trees are cut in a large, in sort of like segments of a pie, with each segment being allowed, without cutting the segment for another 35 odd years, so that it gets a good chance to regenerate. The animals can re-establish their population, they have time to live and breed there, and then when one segment is cut down, because the next segment next to it will have a good complete habitat and ecosystem, the animals that have can simply move into the next segment, and that system maintains itself. So those are all examples of extensive systems. Over the years, our knowledge of extensive and intensive and which ones are priorities has changed. You take back in the 18th century, the 1700s, farms used to be very extensive. You pretty much grow only food for your own family, maybe a pig, a small allotment-sized food. Sometimes it's slightly bigger, but they were very small farms, not meant for mass production or production of other people so much. Then you had what we call the Enclosure Act, where a lot of rich individuals came. They were allowed to purchase a lot, or force purchase a lot of these farms off the smaller, the poorer individuals, and merge it to form one large farm. And they started using what we call a new crop rotation system, where one individual had worked out that different crops, certain types of crops, should be grown each year in a system, on a 4-year system. 1 year it being left fallow for the soil to recover, another year what we call legumes being grown in there, which are plants such as clover. Mainly clover was used, that has got bacteria in it that bring nitrogen back into the soil. They take nitrogen from the air and put it back into the soil. So it's a system that maintains the nutrient content in the soil, and therefore plants grow in there much better. And there weren't many travelling boats at this time. They weren't sturdy enough, but the designs were changing, which was allowing them to travel further out. You were having problems with overfishing nearer the coasts of the UK, but we were starting to be able to travel further out to get food. The start of the 20th century then, you had the introduction of tractors, so a lot more could be done in the given time, because a tractor could do a heck of a lot more work than a horse ploughing fields and so on. The deforestation was at its worst point. The UK in particular has totally changed. 1905 was a major part of which everything had been cut down. So the Forestry Commission was introduced to try and solve these problems caused by intensive deforestation. Overfishing and the systems were getting worse, because steam-powered trawlers were starting to be produced that would go out and overfish at sea. So you'd have to introduce farming systems, aquacultural systems on land. And by 1930s, tractors were being used in the US for deforestation as well as for land production. So deforestation in the US was becoming a major problem. By the 1930s, though, people had begun to realise the importance of organic and extensive farming productions, that they could help to produce more foods that were more healthy, that the intensive production system, the plants are being growing very, very quickly, so they weren't as nutritious and having as many nutrients in them. So the concept of the extensive farming system was starting to come back into the people's thoughts and their demands again. In relation to fishing at sea, the trawlers were getting more and more efficient. They had what we call the fishing drum by now, which could produce catch fish on a huge scale, a much larger scale, tons of fish at a time. So again, overfishing was becoming a much bigger problem. They're having to go out deep into the oceans. Now the problem, just as you're beginning to see the importance of extensive farming, we had World War II, and because of the food shortages we had during World War II, because we were cut off from the rest of Europe by the Axis boats and U-boat destruction of our fleets. As a result, we had what we call rationing and shortage of food quite a while after the World War II as well, because we were still short of foods. So suddenly intensive farming system was a lot more important, and extensive farming was put to one side. Different pesticides and insecticides and herbicides were introduced. DDT was a very famous one that came about at this time, very efficient at destroying pests. We didn't know the problems that were associated with it yet. And the overfishing boats, the trawlers, which were going to be causing overfishing, again had more improvements to increase their massive hauls up to about 40 tons at a time, because they were using nets that went over the stern. By the 1970s now, we were starting to really understand the concept of the ecological damage that intensive farming systems are causing and production systems. Although we sort of knew that the human population had to be fed, and that was causing a problem too, that the human population was booming and we had to find ways to produce food. We also knew that there was damage to the food chains because of chemicals getting into the food chains. DDT was banned because it was realised it was so damaging and there'd been so much research done into it. However, with deforestation, there was massive problems now in the tropics. There was, in the previous decade, there'd been a lot more colonisation of the tropical areas, and now there were different transport systems such as the Trans-Amazonian Highway, which allowed wood to be transported quickly back from the tropical areas, and so the tropical rainforest really becoming a massive issue. So by the 1980s now, we really understood that there was a worldwide issue that deforestation of the tropical areas was affecting the environment and damaging the atmosphere because of carbon dioxide. And overfishing was a big issue, so we had to find other ways, other forms of aquaculture now to produce fish. So it was no good in just relying on trawlers. We have to use aquaculture instead, whether intensive or extensive. Into the 1990s, there was a massive flourish now in organic farming and organic food production, and you'd see these foods that are produced by majority by extensive systems. They'd have a section of their own in the supermarkets, and into the 2000s now you can see that you see Tesco's Finest and what have you, which are usually organic produced, extensive produced rather intensive. They have massive sections of their own because people really do understand a lot more the importance of intensive, helping stop the damage to the ecosystems caused by intensive farming, and the welfare issues associated with it. However, the cheapness due to intensive farming and the need for the production also appeals to people, and so the majority of foods are still produced by intensive. It's probably impossible to produce everything by extensive because then not enough would be produced.